My challenge this morning was actually to communicate change. The brief in my speech said, pick some aspect of change that's happened in your life, talk about that change and communicate that change to your group of Toastmasters. And I thought to myself, we all come from very different sectors. We all have very different jobs. We are all very different personalities. There's lots of different things that all of us are doing at any given time. So I don't know if it would be as helpful to the group for me to communicate just one change as opposed to talking about change in general, diving into the concept of change, talking about a lot of ways that all of us have been impacted by change in the last couple of years, and talking about some ways that we can positively and effectively respond to that change going forward. First, I'm sure all of you know this at this point, but we've been dealing with a little bit of something called COVID-19. It's a pandemic. It's going around, something that maybe you've heard about on the news here and there. But because of that pandemic, we faced just about every major change in the last 2 years that we could have ever, even had no idea was coming. A shutdown, things open back up again, things partially reopen, mask mandates, social distancing, vaccines, people working from home, people not being able to work at all, et cetera, et cetera. And the problem is that all of us have had such a close experience with not just our work lives changing like crazy, but our personal lives also. And it's not just been one massive change that all of us have had to contend with. It's been lots of small changes that are all clustered together and that impact people at lots of varying degrees of severity. Where some people were able to work from home doing the same work that they've always done, but now all of a sudden they have to contend with their kids running around in the background. Other people couldn't work at all. Other people have lost jobs and had to live off of unemployment for months and months at a time, sometimes more than a year. Change is a really scary thing. And I think that the biggest thing that makes it so scary is that it disrupts all of our norms, all of our patterns, all of our natural rhythms, our habits, our routines. And while all of us humans claim to be, oh, we're so spontaneous and that makes us so cool and so exciting, we are creatures of habit. We are creatures who like to establish norms for ourselves. And what's been so challenging about this pandemic is that none of us have been able to reestablish those routines. None of us are able to set up a new normal for ourselves when what we could do changes every 2 weeks because of new mandates, new regulations, new information that we learn about the pandemic and how that continues to influence all the things that we do in our daily lives. And I think that's the biggest stressor for people, not being able to establish any kind of norm, any kind of routine. What's more, it's extremely difficult to plan things in advance. So many of us work in positions where maybe we plan events, maybe we schedule patients, maybe whatever it is, we have to plan something in order to take action. So there's been a lot of speaking off the cuff, a lot of acting maybe with 2 weeks advance notice, because otherwise we couldn't do anything at all. We couldn't take any kind of action. And I tell you what, as one of the most overbearing humans that's ever been born to this planet, not being able to plan things more than 2 weeks in advance has literally made me want to rip my hair out of my skull. But that's the reality that we face. All of this change has led to all these challenges. And it's not just the things that we do at work, it's personal challenges too. We've all seen firsthand, and many of us have experienced the mental health repercussions that come from a constant onslaught of seeming chaos, of not being able to establish routine, of not knowing what's going to happen next. And yes, this is a brief aside, but I think it's especially important for all of us to recognize and be conscientious of how all this change is impacting ourselves and also the people around us. Because it's not just that we can, ignore it and go on with our lives. It affects our work performance. It affects our familial relationships. It affects our personal mental health. And it's important to know that all of this change is impacting the people around you and also impacting you as you go along. So in spite of all that, the positive thing that I wanted to leave the group with is that change always presents an opportunity. And I think that's the key to responding to change in a positive and a productive way. Now, I know that lots of us will have lots of opportunities for change or lots of opportunities to respond to change that are very specific to our sectors or to our jobs. but I have three things that I think are pretty universal to everybody. The first one is that change always presents an opportunity to communicate, whether that's opening a new line of communication with your staff, communicating with your clients, your patrons, your customers. When change occurs, all of a sudden we have an opportunity that we didn't have before, an excuse we didn't have before to open up a dialogue that might not have been there. Here's an example. For me, I work for the Salvation Army, and the pandemic has offered us a really unique opportunity to have regular communication with our donors and with our clients, because all of them need to know about how we've responded to the pandemic. They also need to know what the needs are that have arisen as a result of that pandemic and what they can do to continue to support our mission or to receive services that they need help with. We've also had a really unusual change in the way that our staff works together. All of a sudden, we have to have a unified front as a response to the pandemic. We've had a regular open dialogue across all of our staff who usually exist separately in 4 separate buildings. So all of a sudden, we're no longer different units that are working to achieve a different aspect of our mission. We're one single staff working towards the same consistent and unified goals. It's been a wonderful thing to see. Change also has a really bad habit of bringing things to light that do not work, whether that's cleaning and sanitizing practices, systematic inefficiencies, essential components of an organizational structure that go out the window when one person, the only person trained to do something, gets COVID and gets sick for 2 weeks. And as difficult as it is to face the fact that none of us work in a perfect work environment, approaching those imperfections with the intent to address them rather than the intent to bury them makes operations better for everybody in the long run. This is just a very specific example, but make sure that everybody knows, or at least more than one person knows, how to do everything. Mike Winkles, you might be the one exception to this because you're the doctor in your office, and I don't think most of your staff could probably see your patients. But here's an example. If your accountant gets sick with COVID, your patients didn't stop being billed for services. You'll see how this works. This is also, it applies to our personal lives too. A lot of us have had a very large amount of one-on-one and personal time with the people that we love and care about, people that we live with. And I'm sure that most of us have also experienced the need to strangle the people that we claim to love most dear. But what that also means is all of a sudden, things that maybe don't work in our relationships or things that haven't been addressed are things that we have the opportunity to open up a dialogue about, to talk about, to address. And that's an opportunity that we wouldn't have had if we hadn't had this massive change where all of a sudden we live together a great deal of the time. The last thing that I really wanted to address is, now that we know what the pandemic looks like, it's important for us not to lose all of the knowledge and information of how we made the changes that we made in order to keep functioning during that pandemic. We cannot ever lose our institutional knowledge, get rid of all of the history of how we've done things in the past or how we've responded to these massive roles of changes. Because regardless of who you are or whether you own your business or whether you're an employee, you're never going to be in your place of business forever. You're never going to be the one person who keeps all that institutional knowledge. And if we don't record all of the ways that we responded to change, record all of the changes that happened, and then how we kept functioning in response to those changes, all that institutional knowledge is going to be lost. And then whenever change occurs in the future, it makes it that much harder for people to respond quickly and effectively because they didn't know how we changed and how we responded beforehand. It's so important to keep records, keep knowledge, keep those strategies in place, or at least have them ready to go, because at this point we live in a world where it's likely that change will continue to come very quickly. And there's nothing we can do about that except keep the knowledge, respond as best as we possibly can. Change is never easy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that we should fear or resist. And more often than not, it's necessary. And the ways that we respond to that change, whether they be positive or negative, impact pretty much the positive or negative outcomes of what's going to happen as a result of that change. So I hope this has given you some things to think about. I hope this has been helpful, and I'm grateful for all of your time this morning. Mr. Toastmaster.